It's the third floor. Please hurry, I think someone is still inside. Oh my God.
My apartment burned down close to midnight, and the worst part wasn't the flames. It was my mother's voice on the phone, calm and clipped, like I'd called to ask a favor instead of help. Harper, that's not our problem. I'm Harper Lane, 29, and up until that night, I thought I'd already learned how to live without needing anyone. I had a steady job in Raleigh, North Carolina, projects coordination for a logistics company, not glamorous, but stable. The kind of work where you smile in meetings, fix messes before anyone notices, and pretend the pressure doesn't crawl up your throat. I'd built a life that didn't require a safety net because, if I'm honest, I never really had one. The fire started when I was half asleep on my couch, a laptop open on the coffee table, and a cold mug of tea beside it. I remember the first sound as a sharp chirp, like a bird trapped in my ceiling. Then the smoke alarm screamed, and the whole room seemed to tilt. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. The air tasted wrong, hot and bitter, and underneath it something harsh, like chemical cleaner poured on a stove. My hallway was already gray. When I opened my front door, smoke rolled in like a living thing. People were shouting, doors slammed. Somewhere above me, glass popped with a small explosive snap. The emergency lights blinked red in the corridor, turning everyone into strobing silhouettes. Someone barreled past me, coughing so hard they gagged. A child cried, thin and terrified. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the nearest thing, my coat hanging by the door, and ran for the stairwell. The stairs were packed, feet thundered, hands scraped the railings. The smoke thickened with every step down, pressing against my lungs until every breath felt like pulling air through wet cloth. I kept my head down and my mouth covered, my eyes streaming, and I told myself one thing on repeat: get outside, get outside, get outside. When I finally burst into the cold night, the shock of clean air nearly made me collapse. I stumbled into the parking lot, shaking so hard my knees rattled. Fire trucks screamed into the complex, their lights slicing across the building. I turned back just in time to see my third-floor window glow orange, like a furnace door cracked open. And then I saw flames curl outward, greedy and fast. For a second, I just stood there, frozen. Everything I owned was in that unit: my work laptop, my passport, the framed photo of me and my best friend Elena at graduation, both of us laughing like we weren't terrified of the future, my grandmother's ring, the stack of notebooks where I had been sketching out a side business idea, something small, something mine. All of it was turning to ash. My hands were so numb I could barely unlock my phone. But I knew exactly who I was going to call, because some part of me, no matter how old I got, still reached for my mother when I was scared. Marlene Whitmore, the woman who ran her life like a magazine spread: cream-colored curtains, fresh flowers on the table, a church smile that could cut glass if you looked too closely. Her husband, Gary Whitmore, my stepfather, had entered my life when I was a teenager and treated me like a temporary inconvenience he couldn't return. I'd left home at 18 and never fully gone back, not really. I paid my own tuition, I worked late shifts, I built a career. I thought independence would make me untouchable, but standing in that parking lot watching my home burn, I didn't feel untouchable. I felt 11 years old again. Small, desperate, hoping for softness. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Harper?" Her voice was thick with sleep, annoyed. "Mom?" I said, and my throat tightened around the word. "My apartment is on fire. I got out, but I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anything. Can you—" There was a pause, then a sigh, slow and deliberate, like she was choosing patience. "Harper, what do you expect me to do?" "I just need a place for tonight. Just one night. I'm outside. It's bad." I heard Gary in the background, a rustle. His voice cut in, sharp and irritated. "Tell her to call her insurance. We're not getting dragged into this." My stomach dropped like an elevator cable snapped. "Mom," I whispered, "please." She didn't lower her voice. She didn't soften it. She didn't ask if I was hurt. "We can't have chaos here," she said. "We have responsibilities. And you always bring drama, Harper. Figure it out." I stared at the flames licking the roofline, my breath coming out in shaky white bursts. "My home is burning," I said, and it sounded like a sentence I couldn't believe I had to explain. "I'm sorry that happened," she replied, but there was no sorrow in it, just distance. "Good night." The line went dead. I stood there with my phone pressed to my ear long after the call ended, listening to nothing. Around me, strangers wrapped in blankets hugged each other. A firefighter guided an elderly man to the curb. Someone passed out bottles of water. And my mother, my own mother, had chosen sleep over me. 2 days later, after I'd spent the first night on Elena's couch and the second night staring at the ceiling like it might explain my life, I went to my insurance company. I expected paperwork and waiting. I expected stress. I didn't expect the man behind the counter to look at my file and then look up at me like he'd found a mistake he didn't want to say out loud. "Miss Lane," he said carefully, "there's an issue." My fingers tightened around my pen. "What kind of issue?" He turned his monitor slightly, then slid a printed form across the desk. "Your policy's beneficiary was changed 3 weeks ago." I blinked. "Changed to who?" He cleared his throat. "To Marlene Whitmore and Gary Whitmore." For a second, I couldn't move. The room seemed to narrow. The hum of fluorescent lights grew louder, like a swarm. "That's not possible," I said. He tapped the bottom of the page. It was submitted with a signature. I stared down at it. My name, written in ink, shaped the way I would shape it. Almost, but not quite. There was a strange hesitation in the middle, like someone had copied it slowly, stopping to remember the next curve. A cold wave rolled through me, so sudden it stole my breath. "I didn't sign this," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. The man's expression tightened. "Then we need to escalate this to our fraud unit, and if the fire investigation finds anything suspicious—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I walked out of that office into bright Carolina sunlight that felt wrong against my skin. My phone buzzed as soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk. A text from my mother. "Don't make this a big thing." I read it twice, 3 times. My hands started shaking again, not from shock this time, from something sharper. Because in that moment, the pieces clicked into place with a quiet, terrifying certainty. My apartment hadn't just burned. Someone had positioned themselves to profit from it, and the only person who had the nerve to tell me it wasn't her problem was the person who suddenly stood to gain everything I'd lost. After the insurance office, I didn't drive back to Alina's place right away. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands locked around the steering wheel, staring at that beneficiary form like it was a photograph of a stranger wearing my face. "Don't make this a big thing." My mother's text pulsed on my screen like a warning. Not concern, not apology, a warning. I tried to breathe through it. In for 4, out for 4. Something a therapist once told me during a company wellness seminar I'd attended just to get out of a meeting. But my lungs refused to cooperate. Every inhale tasted like smoke I couldn't wash out of my body. Because the moment I said out loud, "I didn't sign this," I'd stepped into a version of my life where my mother wasn't just cold, she was dangerous. I replayed the last month in my head. searching for the point where the ground had shifted under my feet. And I found it. 3 weeks before the fire, on a Saturday afternoon, Marlene had shown up at my door. It wasn't normal. She didn't drop by, she didn't come to my apartment in Raleigh unless she had a reason, and her reasons were never about me. Usually they were about her image, her story, her need to feel like she still controlled something. That day, she'd stood in the hallway in a cream coat, hair curled neatly, mouth curved into a smile that looked practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in her bathroom mirror before leaving her perfect suburban house. "Harper," she'd said lightly, "I was in the area. I thought, it's been a while." I should have closed the door. I should have told her I was busy. But there's a part of you that never stops hoping the person who hurt you will finally show up as the person you needed. So I let her in. She walked through my apartment like an inspector. Her eyes skimmed my secondhand furniture, my thrift store lamp, the stack of work folders on my kitchen counter. Her face didn't show disgust exactly, just a faint disappointment, like I'd failed a test she never told me I was taking. "I didn't realize you were living like this," she'd murmured. "Living like what?" I'd wanted to ask. Like someone who pays her own bills? Like someone you never helped? Instead, I'd poured her water, I'd watched her set her large purse on my chair, then shift it closer to the bathroom door, like placement mattered. She asked questions, too casual to be kind. "How much do you make now? Are you saving anything? Do you have a plan if something happens?" When I gave her vague answers, she smiled as if she already knew the truth. Then she stood, smooth in her coat. "I need to use your bathroom." She was gone longer than a normal bathroom trip, long enough for me to notice the silence, long enough for me to stand in my kitchen and feel an unease I couldn't name. When she came out, her purse sat differently against her hip, like it was heavier, or like something inside had been rearranged. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid. Now, sitting in my car with the insurance form in my lap, that memory sharpened into something ugly and precise. She'd been inside my home, and 3 weeks later, my home burned. I forced myself to call the fire investigator the insurance guy had mentioned. His name was Dean Hargrove, and he answered on the second ring, with a voice that sounded like it learned how to stay calm around disaster. "Ms. Lane," he said, "I'm glad you called. We need to go over a few details." "Was it an accident?" I asked, and hated how small my voice sounded. Dean exhaled. "It's too early to make a public statement, but I can tell you this. The burn patterns don't match a simple electrical fire. We're testing residue from the kitchen area." Residue. I swallowed. "So you think someone started it?" "I'm saying it's possible," he replied carefully. "That's why I need to ask. Who had access to your apartment in the last month?" "No one," I blurted. Then, as if my own words slapped me, I corrected myself. "My mother came by 3 weeks ago." There was a pause on the line, the kind that makes your skin tighten. "Thank you," Dean said. "That's important. Did she have a key?" "No," I said, "but she could have. She knows where I keep spare things. I stopped before my voice broke. "She's my mother." "We'll review the building entry logs and hallway footage," he said. "In the meantime, don't confront anyone. If there's fraud tied to this, people get desperate." People. He meant her. That night, the next blow landed where I couldn't ignore it. I went to work because I needed something normal to hold on to. I'd barely sat down at my desk when an email popped up from HR. Request for a brief meeting. Private. My stomach twisted as I walked into the small conference room. Renee from HR sat with her hands folded, expression polite but guarded. "Harper," she said, "I want to check in. We received a message from someone who claims to be a concerned family member. They're worried about your mental states after the fire." My mouth went dry. "A family member?" Renee nodded. "They said you've been making accusations. They suggested you might be unstable and that it could affect the team." For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but the pounding in my ears. This was the play. Step 1, steal the money. Step 2, set the fire, or at least benefit from it. Step 3, make sure no one believes me when I speak. I looked at Renee and forced my hands to stop shaking on the table. "I'm not unstable," I said slowly, "but someone is trying to make me look that way." Renee studied me, and I saw a flicker of doubt soften her eyes. "Do you have proof?" Not yet, I thought, but I would. Because my mother didn't just take my safety net, she was trying to take my voice. And the moment I understood that, something inside me hardened into a quiet, unbreakable decision. If she wanted to turn my life into a courtroom, fine. I would walk in with evidence. By the time I got home to Elena's apartment that night, my fear had burned down into something colder: focus. Elena Park didn't ask me to calm down. She didn't tell me to forgive, to breathe, to be the bigger person. She just slid a bowl of ramen across the counter like it was a lifeline and said, "Okay, tell me everything. Start from the insurance form." We sat at her tiny kitchen table under a yellow light that made the world feel almost normal, and I laid the papers out like evidence. The beneficiary change, the signature that wasn't mine, the timeline that had started with a harmless Saturday visit and ended with sirens and ash. Elena listened without interrupting. Then she opened her laptop and created a simple spreadsheet: dates down the left, events down the right. "People who do this," she said quietly, "count on you falling apart, so we're not going to fall apart." The next morning, I called Dean Hargrove again. This time, I didn't sound like a woman asking for help. I sounded like a woman giving information. "My mother visited 3 weeks before the fire," I told him. "She stayed longer than she said she would, and the beneficiary change happened around the same time." Dean's voice stayed steady, but I heard the shift in his attention. "We pulled the building entry logs," he said. "There was a temporary visitor badge issued under your unit around that time frame. We're working with the property manager to access the hallway footage." "Can I see it?" I asked. "You can," he replied, "but not until we preserve the original file. We'll set a time." After I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. There was one thing I knew for sure. If I confronted my mother with nothing but suspicion, she'd twist it, cry, blame me, and walk away clean. She'd been doing that my whole life. So I needed someone who spoke her language: paperwork, process, consequences. That's how I found Morgan Reyes. Elena's cousin worked in legal admin and gave me Morgan's number with a warning: "She's not warm, but she's good." At this point, warm was overrated. Morgan met me in a glass-walled office downtown, wearing a dark blazer and an expression that didn't waste time. She read the insurance form twice, eyes narrowing on the signature. "You didn't sign this," she said, not as a question. "No," I replied. "Good," she said, "because it looks like someone tried to copy your hand. See the hesitation here? The pressure changes mid-stroke. That's not how a person signs their own name." I felt something crack open in my chest. Not relief exactly, but validation, like the floor stopped shifting for the first time in days. Morgan leaned back. "Let's talk procedure. How does your insurer accept beneficiary changes?" I told them it was submitted at a local branch, in person. Morgan's eyes sharpened. "Perfect. That means there's a staff member who saw someone. There may be surveillance. There's paper trail." She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. We file a request to preserve evidence immediately. We send a letter to the insurer's fraud unit. We get the branch's submission records. If there's footage, we secure it before anyone accidentally deletes it. I swallowed. Can we do that fast? We can do it today, but you need to do something too. Stop speaking to your mother. No calls, no texts. Every reaction you give her is information. My phone buzzed in my bag like it had heard her name. A text from Marlene. I heard about HR. This is exactly why you need help. You're spiraling. My fingers went numb. Morgan watched my face. Her, she guessed. I nodded. Save everything. Screenshots, voicemails, dates. If she's trying to paint you as unstable, we document that pattern. That afternoon, Dean called again. We have the hallway footage, he said. Come in. Elena insisted on driving me, like her presence could keep my spine from collapsing. At the property office, Dean pulled up the video on a monitor and pressed play. There she was, Marlene Whitmore, my mother, stepping out of the elevator on my floor in her cream coat, hair perfect, moving with the calm confidence of a woman who believed the world would always make room for her. In her hand was a large black duffel bag. She paused at my door, glanced down the hallway, then went inside. The timestamp ticked forward. Minutes became hours. 3 hours later, the door opened again. Marlene walked out. No duffel bag. My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. Dean didn't look at me. He stared at the screen like he'd seen this story before. That bag matters, he said. I forced out a whisper. She told me she was only there for a few minutes. Dean nodded once. And our fire scene techs found residue in the kitchen area consistent with an accelerant. We're waiting on lab confirmation. An accelerant. I tasted smoke in my mouth all over again. Then my phone buzzed a second time. Another message from my mother. Family meeting this Saturday. Everyone will be there. We're going to clear this up. I stared at the words, and a strange clarity settled over me. This wasn't an invitation. It was a setup. She wanted an audience. She wanted a room full of people primed to see me as hysterical and her as the wounded saint. She wanted to crush me socially before any evidence could surface. Elena leaned over my shoulder and read the text. She thinks she's controlling the stage, she said. Morgan's words echoed in my head. Paperwork, process, consequences. I typed a reply with hands that no longer shook. I'll be there. Then I looked at Dean and said the sentence that changed everything. If she wants a meeting, then she's giving us the perfect place to end this. My mother's house was lit up like a showroom. Every lamp in the living room was on. The coffee table was arranged with pastries and a teapot, the kind of setup that said warmth and family, if you didn't know the difference between a stage scene and a safe place. The air smelled like vanilla candles and control. When I stepped inside, I counted faces the way you count exits in a burning building. Aunt Cynthia, Uncle Aaron, 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, a couple from church, even Mrs. Holloway, my mother's neighbor who treated gossip like a hobby. There had to be 18 people in total, seated in neat little clusters, murmuring softly, eyes flicking to me like I was a problem about to be solved. Elena came with me, but she waited in the car at the curb, where she could stay close without turning my mother's performance into Harper brought reinforcements. Morgan wasn't inside either. Not yet. That was the plan. My mother, Marlene Whitmore, stood the moment she saw me. She wore soft blue, carefully chosen to look gentle, and her eyes were already glassy like she'd warmed them up. "Oh, Harper," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank you for coming. I've been so worried." I didn't hug her. I didn't smile. I just nodded once and walked farther into the room, forcing my feet to move like I belonged there. Gary hovered near the hallway, arms crossed, jaw tight. He avoided looking directly at me, but his eyes kept darting toward my mother, like he was tracking her cues. Marlene turned back to her audience and began. "She's been through so much," she said, voice trembling at the right moments. "The fire, losing everything. Of course she's overwhelmed. But lately, she's been saying things." She shook her head, a sad little gesture for the room. "Accusations. Terrible, hurtful accusations." Aunt Cynthia sighed loudly, as if she'd been waiting for this part. Marlene continued. "I tried to help. I told her I'd handle the insurance paperwork because she's not thinking clearly. And now she's convinced I did something evil." Her voice cracked on the word, and she dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "Can you imagine your own daughter believing you'd hurt her?" A few people murmured sympathy. Someone said, "Poor Marlene." I felt the floor tilt under me, not from panic this time, but from rage so clean it scared me. This wasn't just her lying. This was her trying to write the story while I stood in the room as a prop. I kept my voice low. "You changed my beneficiary." Marlene blinked, then softened her expression into pity. "Honey, you were falling apart. You couldn't even keep track of basic things. I was protecting you." "By putting yourself as the person who gets paid?" I asked. A ripple moved through the room, uncomfortable but small. Gary stepped forward. "Gary, Harper, this is not the time." Marlene lifted a hand like she was calming him, like she was the reasonable one. Then she looked at me with that familiar smile that always made other people doubt my reality. "You're spiraling," she said gently. "Even your HR department is concerned. We're all concerned." I stared at her, letting silence stretch until the room got tense. Then I asked, "What day did you submit the change?" Marlene hesitated, just a fraction. "I don't remember. It was all such a blur." "Did you do it in person at the branch office?" I pressed. Her smile tightened. "Harper, sweetheart, you're doing it again." I took a breath. I heard Elena's voice in my head. "Be the calmest person in the room." So I nodded, like I was letting it go, like I was the unstable one trying to be good. "I'm sorry," I said. Can I have a minute? I need air." Marlene's shoulders relaxed, satisfied. She'd expected me to crack. She'd expected me to run. And I did walk out, but not because I was defeated. Because the next part required timing. Outside, the night air hit my face cold and sharp. Elena was already stepping out of the car, eyes searching mine. "Now?" she whispered. "Now," I said. She handed me my phone, Dean's number already open. I tapped once. He answered immediately. "We're around the corner." "Come," I said. One word. That was all I could trust my voice to carry. I walked back inside before they arrived. I stood in the center of the living room and let my gaze move across the faces, letting everyone feel the shift. "My mother says I'm unstable," I said quietly, "so I brought something unstable people don't bring." Marlene's eyes narrowed. "Harper, stop." "I brought evidence," I said. I pulled out my phone and played the hallway footage. The room leaned forward without meaning to. People stared at the screen, watching Marlene step out of the elevator on my floor with a large black duffel bag, then disappear into my unit. 3 hours later, she came out without it. The murmurs started, low, sharp, confused. Marlene lunged a half step toward me, voice rising. That's nothing. I had things for you." "For 3 hours?" I asked. Gary's face went pale. The doorbell rang. Every head turned. Gary moved like a man in a nightmare to open the door, and Dean Hargrove walked in with a uniformed officer and Morgan Reyes right behind them. The room went silent so fast it felt like pressure in my ears. Dean's voice was steady, professional. "Marlene Whitmore, we're investigating the fire at Harper Lane's apartment. Based on physical evidence and documentation, we have probable cause to believe the fire was intentionally set and tied to insurance fraud." Marlene's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, please turn around." Marlene's face twisted. This is a lie. She's doing this to me. And then Gary, who'd been so certain he could hide behind her, broke. Marlene, stop. They have everything. You said it was just the money. You said you just wanted to teach her a lesson. The sentence landed in the room like a gunshot. Marlene spun toward him with pure hatred in her eyes, but it was too late. The officer took her wrists. Metal clicked shut. The sound was small, but to me, it sounded like the end of a lifetime of being told my reality was wrong. As Marlene was led past me, she stared straight into my face. No tears now, no softness, no mask. Just the truth. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. After the squad car pulled away, my mother's living room looked the way it actually was. Too bright, too staged, too quiet. The pastry sat untouched. The vanilla candle kept burning, sweet and pointless. No one knew where to put their eyes. Aunt Cynthia stood with her hand over her mouth, trembling. Uncle Aaron stared at the carpet like it might open and swallow him. People who'd arrived ready to watch me spiral now looked like they were the ones losing balance. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like the fire had taken more than furniture. It had burned away the last excuse I'd ever had to hope. Dean Hargrove spoke to the room in the same calm voice he'd used on the phone, explaining the basics: evidence preservation, an ongoing investigation, formal interviews. His words were procedural, but the meaning behind them was brutal. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't family drama. This was criminal. Morgan Reyes stayed close to me without touching me, like she understood that even comfort could feel like pressure right then. Outside, Alana waited by her car. When I finally stepped onto the porch, she wrapped her arms around me hard enough to make me breathe again. "You did it," she murmured. "No," I said, voice rough. "I survived it." The next weeks were a blur of interviews, paperwork, and the kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones. The fire department's lab confirmed an accelerant in my kitchen area. Dean told me they'd matched the burnt plastic fragment to a cheap timer device, the kind you could buy at a discount shop. A store near my mother's neighborhood had footage of a woman with curled hair and a cream coat purchasing one around the right time. It wasn't a perfect shot. Security cameras never are. But stacked with everything else, it held. The insurance company's fraud unit moved fast once Morgan got involved. The beneficiary change was frozen. The payout was halted. The branch office pulled their own internal records, and a staff member identified my mother from a photo lineup as the woman who'd submitted the paperwork for her daughter. Morgan's handwriting expert report landed like a hammer. The signature showed signs of tracing and unnatural pauses. Gary, desperate to save himself, cooperated. That part didn't surprise me. Men like him were brave only when they thought someone else would take the fall. Under pressure, he admitted what we'd suspected: debt, gambling, credit cards maxed out, the threat of losing the house that held my mother's perfect image. My policy wasn't just money to them. It was rescue. And I was collateral. At work, HR closed their wellness concern file after Morgan sent a formal letter documenting harassment and interference. Renee apologized to my face, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I should have come to you differently," she said. "You should have," I replied, and I didn't soften it. Not to be cruel, to be clear. One afternoon, Aunt Cynthia called and cried so hard she could barely speak. "I believed her," she choked out. "I'm so sorry, Harper. I thought you were losing it." My hand tightened around the phone, not in anger anymore, but in a tired kind of honesty. "You believed what was convenient," I said, "and that's your choice. But from now on, you don't get access to me just because you share my blood." The line went quiet. Then she whispered, "What can I do?" I stared out my new apartment window at a small strip of trees swaying in the wind. The place was temporary, one bedroom, second-hand couch, borrowed dishes, but it was mine. "You can respect my boundaries," I said. "That's what you can do." Morgan helped me file for a no-contact order, not because I was afraid my mother would show up crying on my doorstep, but because I understood something I'd ignored for years. People who rewrite reality don't stop when you ask nicely. They stop when the law stands between them and you. When the insurance payout finally cleared, after the legal dust settled enough for the company to release it to the rightful policyholder, I didn't celebrate with shopping or revenge fantasies. I bought a new laptop. I replaced my documents. I rented a safer building with proper sprinklers and better security. I bought one small plant and set it by the window because it felt like proof that something could live after heat and smoke. I also started therapy. In my first session, the counselor asked me what hurt the most. I thought it would be losing my home, but what came out was quieter. "I called my mom when I thought I might die," I said, staring at my hands, "and she chose herself." The counselor didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it exist. And in that space, I felt something shift, like my grief finally had permission to be real. A month later, Elena and I signed our first major contract for the small consulting side business we'd been building. It wasn't a miracle. It was work. Steady, disciplined, stubborn work. The kind my mother used to mock as rigid because she couldn't manipulate it. And that's when the ending finally came into focus. My mother wanted to burn my life down and collect the payout: money, control, silence. Instead, the fire exposed everything she'd hidden behind her smile. And it showed me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Family isn't who shares your name. Family is who shows up when your world is on fire. If this story hit you in the chest, do me a favor, tap like, drop a comment, and tell me, would you forgive someone who tried to destroy you, or would you walk away for good? And don't forget to subscribe to Stillwater's Payback, because the next story might feel even closer than you expect.